Everyone in this audience knows I love animals, but I especially love dogs. And having had the pleasure of reading a galley before release of our guest book and submitting praise for it, I wrote of Elena Mannes' book about her dog Brio and their shared life in Soul Dog, a journey into the spiritual life of animals that, quote, Elena and Brio's story showcases the precious trans-species adoration and communication in life and the afterlife between a woman and her dog. Discovering Brio's creative and original mind, as Elena put it, Mannes' own testimony, both reflective and humorous, weaves science and personal experience into a kind of Tao of dog. She shows us how animal can help us learn to sit, walk, stay, and lie down in reciprocal respect, love, and joy. This book, I wrote, sparkles with delight, unquote. Elena, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, well, thank you for having me, and thanks for that lovely endorsement as well. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm not an impartial cheerleader here. I'm already a fan, both of the subject matter and your beautiful book, because you've done something so many of us have hoped to see who have been in sort of the biz of sentient consciousness, that you wrote a story of your own journey. So let's start there. A little bit about your own career life as an investigative journalist, documentary maker, and more, because that was really the kind of the backdrop to the time period in which you met your wonderful dog, Brio.
Absolutely. Well, as you say, I was having quite a good career as a television documentary director, producer, writer, and traveling a lot and very, very busy, high-pressure job. But I, at a certain point, was going through sort of a midlife crisis. A relationship had ended not too well, and then I had a near-fatal car crash on a film shoot, and all of this put together kind of made me stop and ask if maybe there should be more to my life than just working like a demon and getting into car crashes. And I'd always loved animals as a child, but, we had cats, and I did think of them really as pets, as many people did and still do, as sort of under our command and there to provide comfort and unconditional love, but really under our control and sort of subjective beings, if you will. But I decided I would get a puppy to fill the gap that I felt in my life at that point. And I was quite a hard-driving type A person at that time. I was all wrapped up in my career and I had a reputation for toughness, I think. I know in terms of how I dealt with other people that I worked with, I was very ambitious and had high standards both for myself and others.
I'm surprised we didn't meet in all those years. I go, wow, who does that sound like?
Right. So people who knew me thought and said often that I was not doing a rational thing to get a puppy. Mm-hmm. How was I going to have time? And, I think they worried about how I would maybe treat the puppy or, would I give it enough time and care? And many people thought I was really crazy, and frankly, I did in a way also, but I kind of kept going and made the decision. So I did go get a standard poodle puppy.
And talk to us a little bit, because I thought one of the beautiful things you said early on in your book, and we can flush that out a little bit more, is that, after you got to know Brio, you asked not if this was the right dog, but if you were the right owner.
Absolutely. So, I brought him home, and pretty much from the beginning, the relationship was not what I had expected. I had expected I would get trainers, and they would teach Brio to obey me, and, things would be pretty smooth, and my life would continue pretty much as it had without very much disruption. Well, and the puppy would indeed, Brio would give me, that unconditional love and, be a cuddly little puppy that would just
Hallmark
comfort for me.
Right, the Hallmark puppy.
Right. Well, things were not going that way in the beginning at all, and he was very independent-minded. He was very confident. He had a very, very strong spirit. He didn't listen to me very much, despite the training. The training helped, but I just didn't feel I was communicating with him. I really thought that, as you said, I didn't talk dog, and I didn't know how to deal with him. I didn't understand him, and, I was really quite despairing, actually, in many ways. So one day, actually, and I was screaming for him in the park to come back. He would run away, and I was walking backwards, calling him, and found myself stepping over backwards into a boat pond, which wasn't very deep, actually, but very humiliating and kind of a metaphor for the way I felt, that I was really had stepped over the edge of an abyss somehow, and I didn't know what I'd gotten myself into.
In over your head, as they say.
Yes.
And so, you describe these things, and I think one of the beauties of the journey you share with readers is this weaving of how far we've come in our scientific understanding and our real study of animal, and yet here you were, a first-time dog owner, and if anybody in the audience has never owned a dog, and especially has never owned a puppy, it is really not a lot different than having a newborn. It is a 24/7 job in the beginning, or it doesn't turn out well, put it that way. If you don't put the time in the beginning, you will be so regretful that you didn't. So talk to us about how having this puppy and having to change your schedule and walking a dog in New York City and your career, not being, you couldn't just focus on that anymore. You had the sentient being you had to take care of. How much did having Brio in the beginning in your life change how you even looked at what you were doing?
Oh, well, I thought my life had been invaded. When I couldn't focus on work, it was a relief to go to work, really, frankly. It was terrible to say, but, I could get away from him for a while. I can't believe I felt this way, but I did, but I just wanted to get back to my normal, ordinary work life,
Yeah.
But, as you said, it was pretty much impossible. And I probably didn't give him all the attention that he should have had. I left him in a crate all day. I had dog walkers coming in. And, it was fortunate in retrospect that he was such a confident, really wise puppy deep down that, he dealt with it. Mm-hmm. But I was not dealing with it very well.
Well, and there is something to be said for lack of experience. It's like when you're a new mother and you take home your child and it's a newborn and nobody's told you anything. You don't learn these things by watching TV. You actually have to have the experience. And I can remember when I had so many dogs at one point that leaving the house was like without one of them. It was like, oh my God. It was like I can remember it was getting out of the house without the toddler. Now, you comment somewhere along the way that Brio had complete control over his life without needing to control his life. And I thought it was such a beautiful insight about one of the things canines offer us.
Well, that's true. He, as I said, he was so self-confident and, comfortable in his own skin that, nothing really fazed him. But he also had this ability to kind of, he had his own mind. Like I said, he would run off if he felt like it when he was a puppy and, disobey me. But, he pretty much went with the flow. He coped with the small apartment and the city and the noises and everything. And he wasn't nervous. You could just tell that he knew that he could handle whatever came along.
So as you became a dog lover and a dog talker, I guess, and I almost hesitate even myself to say owners because I always feel like the dogs own me more than I own them.
Well, exactly. I don't like to say that anymore, but at the time I did.
Yeah, no, it's a different kind of reciprocal love. It's no more than owning a child. You don't really own your dog.
He owned me as much as I owned him. As it turned out.
No question about it. So you tell extraordinary stories throughout the book, but I think it's important to let our audience appreciate that you had this gradual introduction into animal communication through trainers and then later through animal communicators and psychics and then your own experiences. But talk to us a bit about how that journey into this other stratosphere of reality was so different from what you had believed?
Well, I was, a trained skeptic as a journalist, not to believe anything unless it was kind of proven by multiple sources and empirical fact. But I was so frustrated with, the lack of a connection with Brio that I had kind of heard. I didn't really know anything about it, but I guess I had heard that there were people who called themselves animal communicators or animal psychics who said they could tell you what a dog or another animal was thinking or feeling. So, I was used to doing research for work, and so I did a little research and found this communicator in California who had a good reputation. So I called her up and asked if she'd read Brio over the phone. I mean, she'd never met me or Brio, of course, and I didn't tell her anything about him or me except for his name and his breed. And she gave this remarkably accurate reading over the phone across the country about describing my apartment and how Brio navigated within it around the furniture, sort of really rang true as his point of view, and the streets he liked to walk on and the neighborhood. She described the streets accurately. She said things about his personality, about me that really rang true. So I was pretty stunned. I mean, I can't say I was a believer in telepathic interspecies communication at that point, but I really had to sort of sit up and say, ooh, I mean, what is going on here? I mean, how could she have known all that? So that, tweaked my interest, and I began talking to some other communicators to sort of see if they agreed with the first one more or less, and then I actually persuaded the network I was working for to let me do a couple stories looking at animal intelligence and including sections on animal communication, telepathy. So those were pretty interesting also.
Well, that's one of the beautiful things about individual journeys is had you not been, in that career, you wouldn't have benefited so many thousands of other people. And I love that you shared two stories. There was one about Diane Sawyer's dog, as you went forward in your research, and then this extraordinary reading of a horse in the Belmont Stakes. Maybe you could share those two stories, and then we'll take a break.
Sure. Well, first of all, I was doing a documentary about the amazing animal mind when Diane Sawyer was the correspondent. So part of that was about, I decided to have animal psychic read Diane's dog. So we flew the psychic across the country. It was the same one who had first read Brio.
Right.
Flew her from California to New York, and first we taped Diane's dog at her home. With Diane was not present. We just taped the dog walking around the yard to see what he did, and in the house what he did. And then the animal psychic, met the dog and Diane in a hotel room, not knowing anything about him again except for his name and his breed. And she took the dog into the bedroom of the hotel suite for about an hour, as I remember, and came out and gave a report. And this was not my dog, of course, so I couldn't testify to everything she said. But she said one thing, that the dog was scared. He remembered spinning and falling. And Diane did say that he had indeed fallen into a swimming pool when he was a puppy. Mm-hmm. And then the psychic described what the dog did at Diane's home, in the yard, and in the home. And we ran, what she said, against the videotape that we'd taken, and it was right on. I mean, she described how the dog went among some trees and down to a stream in the yard, and what he did in the house, and how he went around the furniture, and you could see in the video it was exactly what he did.
It's an interesting phenomenon. I'm also an animal communicator and a dog reader and a wild animal seeker and whatever. And I have to say, I used to work with babies and humans, and I find animals to be so much easier. I mean, babies are easy, but humans are difficult as they grow up. But right. I have found that the difference between, let's say, the human species and the animal kingdom, let's just say all the animal kingdom, is the animal kingdom communicates so cleanly and so clearly, and there's so little psychobabble. Whereas,
that's what I've heard from other communicators.
It's really
we
true.
Humans have all this noise.
We do. We humans have so many layers, there's so much complication and so much self-deception and then other deception, but animals tell you exactly what they see, what they feel, what they think, what they know, and they're very funny, though. It's not to say they don't have extraordinary senses of humor and tell jokes and dress up and really strange stuff in the spirit body, but and so when I read your book, I just love your book, Elena.
Oh, thank you.
I feel like you have your journey with Brio was not just for yourselves alone, but for the world, and that's a beautiful addition. So I'll tell you what, it's just beautiful what the two of you have brought to all of us. We're going to take a break. We'll come back, and then we'll come back to the Belmont Stakes story, and then we'll move further into the journey with Brio himself.
Okay, great. This is Kevin Schneider, Executive Director of the Non-Human Rights Project, the only civil rights organization in the United States working to establish fundamental rights for non-human animals. You can find out more about us at nonhumanrights.org, and you're listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zohara Hieronimus.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. Indeed, Kevin's work and the Non-Human Animal Project is so essential. And our guest, Elena Mannes, I saw that you mentioned that in your book.
Yes, I really, there certainly is a shift going on, I think, in terms of more recognition of animal rights, and that they're not our non-human animals are not our inferiors, but rather at least our equals, and I think maybe often our superiors. And I believe they're our teachers, that they bring us such great gifts and can really transform our lives if we're open to listening to them.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I was so glad you mentioned J. Allen Boone, who really helped me as a young person when I could only think that Dr. Dolittle and Pippi Longstocking were like, they were the best in the world. Who could have a life better than Pippi Longstocking? And then I came across J. Allen Boone, and in the 50s, he wrote about his experience, not just with his film dog, a shepherd named Strongheart, but ants and communicating with everything. So and we'll come back to the Belmont Stakes, because I'm sure somebody in the audience is going, wait, you haven't done that yet. But I want, because I think it's the most essential part of your journey, is what a change your life underwent, and what a change your perspective about the world has taken. And so maybe you can spend a little bit of time and tell us about that.
Sure. Well, certainly during his physical life, my connection with Brio developed into such a close bond with the help of the animal communicators. But he was just a magical being, which other people recognized that he had a wisdom about him, and he seemed connected to something larger than himself, some other dimension. And he taught me things like to remain in the moment. He used to pull me into flower shops, for one example, and he would just sit there. He didn't want treats or attention. He would just sit there smelling the flowers. And,
how lovely.
It was, who would have guessed that a dog would teach me to stop and smell the roses? But, in a way it's a cliche, that lesson, but it was so meaningful to me. And he was, he taught me, he got sick at certain points. He didn't have the most perfect health through his life, but he never let it bother him. His spirit was always strong. And, I wanted to be more like him. I wanted his strength and his spirit. And then the greatest gift, in a way, from this relationship came after his physical passing, which, of course, is devastating. I mean, it's so hard to physically be with an beloved being, that we share our lives with, and lose them physically. And of course, I experienced that grief like anybody else. But I remained in touch with the animal communicators, and especially with their help, I continued to get amazing messages from Brio that totally convinced me that his spirit had endured, and he was with me. His consciousness was still there, and of course, to believe that means changing one's whole perspective about existence itself and reality itself.
Yeah.
There is consciousness and soul, and that survives physical death. That But these, we can talk more about it later, but the reports, from Brio, and clearly from Brio, because it was so specific about what I was doing, what I ate, where I was, things that the animal communicators could never possibly have known. I didn't say anything.
Right.
They were completely out of the blue. It wasn't things I was thinking about. They would describe where Brio was in my house and describe the layout of my office precisely and where Brio was in it at that moment, and describing wood trim on the floor, which, I never even looked at. I don't remember even observing the wood trim in my house, but anyway.
Well, I think it's a little hard for me to relate to people who make this quantum leap at some point from what I guess, for simplification, the old paradigm to the new paradigm, because I sort of grew up believing in the new paradigm before I knew it existed and had experiences that were weird and, have always sort of gravitated this way and have had the benefit of interviewing sort of the who's who of the who's who in these fields. And so that's, I think, another reason I'm so deeply appreciative of your book, because sometimes those of us who have been in this work for 40 years or more, you get a little jaded. It gets a little difficult sometimes to express to others who maybe haven't yet had the experience how beautiful an experience it is. And I know you mentioned Kanzi, which was interesting to me, who's a bonobo, who Sue Rumbaugh didn't teach him directly, but tried to teach his mother, Matata, how to use to communicate. And as you rightly pointed out, Kanzi learned how to do that. But, there's an interesting story you may not know. Before I wrote my own book, I interviewed Sue, and then Matata showed up in her astral body in my bedroom. And then we began to have a conscious communication. I recorded 30 conversations, and then I wrote about it and included her stories in my book. But her opinion of Kanzi was, she didn't celebrate his intelligence at all. She said he didn't have manners. He didn't know how to behave as a bonobo because, his father wasn't allowed to stay with them, et cetera, et cetera. But I thought it was so wonderful you mentioned him. I just had to say that. All right. So you also bring up people like Rupert Sheldrake's work of morphic resonance and this notion of non-locality and resonance-related theory. So having sort of globbed that all together, and our audience has heard us talk about this stuff for decades now, how has this whole world perspective changed your world and your life in the world?
Well, I guess in short that I don't take material reality for the be-all and end-all. I cannot have gone through this experience and not be convinced that there are things going on here that I can't explain by ordinary means, by materialistic, rational Western science and empirical evidence. It's coming from another dimension, another reality that, as I say in the book, the world of the invisible. Mm-hmm. And to have come from being really a committed skeptic about all that to being convinced that this dimension exists, that I can't deny it, and now, of course, I embrace it. That's a huge change.
Yeah, may you be really influential in the media, please.
Well, from your lips.
Bring it on. Bring it on, Elena. No, it's because I think how many millions of people would benefit by having confirmed what they experience, but don't know other millions are experiencing it. Or they can't talk to their family about it, or they can't talk to their spouse about it, or their child has an experience and nobody understands it. I loved it. You quoted Albert Einstein, who has commented, quote, "The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift." I thought that was one of the most beautiful summaries I've seen of our complex.
Yeah, it's a wonderful quote. I think very true. And I was certainly an example of, somebody who's very dependent on the rational mind. That's who I thought I was.
Mm-hmm.
So this journey has really changed, obviously, as I said, my own identity, how I think of myself, and, other people and life. And
talk to us a bit about, because not all of our audience knows about distant healing for animals, even though we've done shows. They may have missed them or they may not believe in it. But you mentioned that at one point, Brio wasn't healthy. You took him to the vet. They didn't know what to do. He couldn't walk. Share with us what happened.
Yeah, I mean, he was only about 8, and one day he just collapsed on the street and couldn't walk. So, of course, I was desperate. I took him to my vet, and, there ended up being weeks of every test known to man, and finally, it wasn't his heart, it wasn't anything orthopedic. Finally, neurologist did all these kind of scans, and he was diagnosed with a degenerative neurological thing, sort of what they call the ALS for dogs, degenerative myelopathy, and the verdict from the Western doctors was that he probably, was never going to walk normally again, much less run. And he loved to run. He was such an active dog. He just loved to run in the wind. And, my heart was broken. I mean, I was just devastated. And, I had, somebody mentioned that a business acquaintance of mine might know somebody who I could talk to who did this thing called energy healing. I mean, I really had no idea what they were talking about at that point, but I thought, what do I have to lose? So I called this woman she's an animal communicator, but she also does energy healing, that she can somehow feel what's going on in an animal's body physically and work with the energy and shift things around. So, this was a long-distance call. Again, she'd never met me, never met Brio, didn't know anything. I just briefly described that, he couldn't walk, and gave his name, I guess, and the breed. And after, I guess, feeling him, there was a lot of silence on the phone, she finally said, there's nothing wrong with his spine, which the neurologist had said. And I'm going to work with them today and a few more times, but you will have your dog back. He's going to be able to walk and run again. And that turned out to be true. We had several more years of very active life together. It seemed like a miracle to me, really.
Such a beautiful story. It gives me an opportunity to come back to the story we haven't shared that I thought was worth talking about, that people at a distance, when they talk to an animal, don't need to be in the animal's presence, and that they can learn things that even those most intimate with the animal will not believe, like this horse at the Belmont Stakes.
Yes. Well, this was back relatively early on in my journey when I was kind of doing research, and, this story for the network was part of my research.
Right.
So I persuaded them to let me have an animal psychic talk to one of the horses entered in that year's Belmont Stakes, which, as many people know, is the third leg of the thoroughbred horse racing Triple Crown. And so I arranged for the psychic to come. The only trainer of any horse in the race who would allow me to do this was the trainer of the longest shot in Belmont Stakes history. It was 70-1, 70-1.
Wow.
So I was not thrilled at this, but I had no choice. So we went ahead. So we go out with the film crew to the racetrack with the animal psychic, and she meets the horse, whose name was Sarava. And there's quite a few minutes of silence, which the cameras were rolling, and I was, thinking this is going to be a disaster. And Sarava's standing there munching hay, and nothing much was happening. So finally the psychic says, he says he's going to win. Now, this was the year that a very famous horse, War Emblem, was supposed to win the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness, and he was supposed to win the Belmont and the Triple Crown. So the trainer looked completely shocked. We all sort of either were silently snickering or sort of in a state of shock. But the trainer sort of plaintively asks, well, why does he think he's going to win?
Right.
And Dawn, the animal psychic, who's so gifted, I have since learned, says very confidently, he knows he can do it, and he wants to do it for you, his trainer, and the owner. So, with that, we sort of wrapped up, and I'm trying to think how I'm ever going to do this story and make
Right.
something of this. So we all go home, and the next day is the race, so I'm sitting at home watching it on TV, and all the talk is about War Emblem, and the announcer, all the focus in the beginning of the race is on War Emblem, and no mention really of Sarava until the far turn, when all of a sudden I hear the announcer start yelling, Sarava is making a move. He's pulling up. He's passing War Emblem. And then finally he says, Sarava has won the Belmont Stakes.
Unbelievable. Great story.
So it was. I mean, when I tell the story, I think, my word, so I was just, I don't know, my jaw literally dropped. Finally, I recovered enough to call Dawn, the psychic, who was upstate at her place, and she was not surprised, but she said she was so moved that, she was brought to tears.
Yeah, it's so beautiful.
Watching him win.
And so beautiful that the horse told her his reason. They don't always tell you everything in their thinking because it could upset somebody. I mean, they're very judicious sometimes. But it's such a lovely, what's the right word, exclamation point to the phenomena.
It is. I mean, it's still, on the face of it, it's amazing. It's unbelievable that she predicted this. The horse predicted it, and he actually won. And she said that, he told her, afterwards, or she heard him say something, or felt that he was so proud of what he had done that, he knew he could do it, and, he was proud that he could do it.
It's a beautiful story.
Touching.
It's just a beautiful story. If you're just joining us, Elena Mannes is our guest. Her book, Soul Dog, A Journey into the Spiritual Life of Animals, a Bear & Company 2018 release. Learn more about her work at www.mannesproductions, MANNES, and we'll be right back.
Hi, this is Dr. Susan Arick, founder of the Earthfire Institute Wildlife Sanctuary and Retreat Center, just west of Grand Teton National Park. Our mission is to expand our sense of community to truly include all life in our thinking, and what a difference that would make in our decision-making and in the state of the earth. You can learn more about us at www.earthfireinstitute.org. You're listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zahara Hieronimus.
So coming back to our discussion overall about your life with Brio, I want to be sure we talk about his passing and then the afterlife communication. So maybe you can describe for us that process.
Yes, well, his passing was, as I've said, for all of us, it's, of course, a very difficult moment. I finally realized that he was really suffering. He was in really the point had come where he was having seizures a lot. So I had arranged for the vet to come to my house, and I also had one of the animal communicators on the phone with me because I wanted to go through this with him, but I wanted that support.
That's so
from
smart.
Her also, so I was holding him through the process, and I had the phone in the crook of my shoulder. And when the final injection went in, I felt this amazing kind of like a spiraling sensation or a vertigo, like I was turning around and around in a centrifuge almost and going up and out.
Mm-hmm.
And I just held on to Brio. I felt I was going with him somehow. It's an experience I will never, ever forget. But the communicator, after it was over, I asked the communicator what that was, if she felt it, and she said, yes, that was his energy expanding as it left his body. The energy compresses in our physical bodies and then expands again when it leaves our bodies. And I totally felt that. And then that was quite an amazing experience. And then, as I mentioned earlier, in the days after and continuing to this day, the messages from Brio, first initially mostly through the communicators, because I was obviously grieving and so distraught, but they continued to give these remarkable reports from Brio that, I couldn't question that they came from him because they were so accurate and so, things that the communicators couldn't have known anyway. And so clearly were from Brio that just, I knew without question that, his spirit was and is there. Then over the years, over time, I'm not an animal communicator, but I am able to connect with Brio directly myself more and more. He comes to me in meditation, not in words, so to speak, really, as, the animal communicators translate, but, in a feeling, just knowing his presence is there, or imagery sometimes. So that, as I've said, is just a wonderful, wonderful gift.
Yeah, there's a lovely man, Rob Goutreau, who writes about pets and the afterlife. And I had an experience with one of my many dogs, one that I was especially close with, and particularly I've always had big dogs, and then I had some small dogs for about 14 years who were my daughters. I joke I rescued my dogs from my daughter. It was a little Yorkshire Terrier and a Shih Tzu, and I've always had big Labs and Pyrenees and Shepherds, big dogs. But these two little dogs for 14 years were my daily go-everywhere be-all. And when they both passed on, one after the other every year, there's still grief. I mean, people always say, oh, you'll get over it. Well, I have not. And I have found that with a small dog, they're part of your body. They were on the bed, in my lap, in the car seat. It's like everything was so physically intimate that when they're gone, it was like part of my body was gone too. It's
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
So I'm right with you, and I think everybody in our audience who has loved a dog or loved a cat or a parrot or a ferret or a snake or a turtle or a fish and has really come into loving rapport knows what this grief is like. So in the afterlife, does Brio talk to you about the afterlife of what a dog's afterlife has been like, or what Brio's afterlife, or is he going to come back as a dog or something else?
Well, I mean, I can't, in the early days after he had passed over, the communicators sometimes described, that he might have been with, for example, a black cat that maybe he'd known, or that he's happy and running, which some of them have said that's a common experience or report they get from dogs who passed over, that they're free and they're no longer sick and they're able to run. In the beginning, I desperately wanted him to reincarnate. I mean, I pretty much believe in reincarnation. And I kept searching for some clues to a puppy, who would be Brio reincarnated.
Yeah.
And
ditto. I relate, by the way, to that one.
But I did get another black standard poodle about 4 months after Brio passed, who I love greatly, but I don't believe he's Brio reincarnated. He's a very different spirit, soul, and personality in his own right. I mean, maybe Brio will reincarnate. I don't know. It's possible, although
I have a really unusual question for you that maybe you can talk to Brio about, is whether or not dogs, unlike humans who are individuated souls, I think dogs are individuated personalities and souls, but somehow or other one of my dogs said that if a dog wants to be here, they don't have to reincarnate as a puppy, that they can enter the body of an already living animal. Yeah,
one or two of the communicators I talked to said that also.
Well, that gives us a lot of...
I don't know if that came from Brio, but...
my dog told me that from the other side, my little Shih Tzu Oxford. That's what he told me. He said, stop looking. When you find the dog, I'll be there.
Wow.
And that's what he was trying to tell me, that a dog spirit can, and there's certain deceased beings who can do this, humans also, who can occupy another human's body for whatever reasons they need to from the other side, either to help a person live longer, to help save a life of a child. Sometimes, disincarnate humans will do that. But that's what he said to me. And I don't know. I haven't talked to other animal communicators about, so I'm glad to hear you've heard that from others. But yeah, that's what my Shih Tzu Oxford said. He said, "Don't worry about it, Zoe. I'll find you. When you find a dog, I'll be there."
Oh, but I really, I really feel that Brio is with me in spirit. I mean,
Yeah. No doubt, absolutely. So when we sort of take a picture of Elena, your life before, and then your life with Brio, and now your life with your other animals, and your role in the world in the media, what do you say to anybody in the audience who says, "I don't know about animals communicating"?
Well, I'm even friends of mine are saying that all the time. They don't quite buy that, or they don't buy, having somebody else translate a communication from my dog. So that's okay. I mean, I'm not out to persuade anybody, but, maybe for people who are intrigued or interested, to hope that they might listen to their animals more and consider the possibility. But in terms of my life, I didn't disclose publicly my interest or really increasing conviction in, in interspecies communication with a dog, really until this book has come out, because I was somewhat worried about the effect on my career, and to some degree still am. But
I wouldn't worry about it. The world's catching up.
I committed to writing this book, and that's what I believe, and that's what my experience was and is. So I'm going to tell the truth about it. People can take it or leave it.
It's a beautiful service. As I always tell people when they come to this work new, or when they've always felt it and then actually make a commitment to it, is none of us owe a justification to anybody. What we have is the pleasure of being grateful for the experience. And that's what I always tell people. You don't need to convince anybody. Just have the experience.
Only the greatest conviction is going through the experience
exactly.
themselves. So, but you have to be open to it.
Yeah. No, I think what you've done with your, and I'm so grateful for the fact that you've come out, as they say, with the fact that you talk to your dog. It's a beautiful legacy. It's been with humankind ever since, and always will be, because that's what consciousness is and does. It communicates with each other. So is there anything else you'd like to share with us that I've not touched on and that you've not had a chance to share?
Oh, I think we've touched on so much. It's wonderful to talk to you. There are two big, messages or points, that I hope the book does convey. And one is that, our fellow animals are teachers and sentient thinking beings with consciousness and souls, and we should be open to that, and we should listen to them. And I do believe, I hope that the general perspective about non-human animals is shifting. There's a long way to go, but I hope it's on the road. And secondly, I hope the book encourages people to, again, listen to their animals and be open to receiving these incredible gifts that they bring us, and that are transformative. Brio transformed my life, and very profoundly, and I think that all our animals can do that if we're open to it.
Very true. That's really the heart of my life, is the animal world. And as much as I work with humans and work on human issues, I have to say my joy is nature and animals. And so it's always a pleasure for me to have a guest like you, and to meet a woman who, has said, well, I wasn't that way, but I am now, and welcome to the party.
Well, I've just loved talking to you. It's a great pleasure.
Thank you so much. And to Brio, baby, you're a guy, all right. He's very funny. He has a very funny dog. He
is. What is he saying?
Well, I see him kind of dancing like a cane and top hat, and he's going, and that's the show, and now that's the show. No, he's saying thank you very much. He absolutely adores you. He says you're doing everything you're supposed to, and aren't we having fun? That's what he says. Aren't we having fun? That's the end of the hour. 21st Century Radio is produced by Hieronimus and Company. Our executive producer and research assistant is Laura Kortner. I'm Dr. Zohara Hieronimus, and remember, we do need more love in the world.